Thank you very much, Dr. Hebaro, for your talk. Even though the topics not just you've covered a discussion that I would say goes beyond just about the topic on authoritarianism in the Arab states, but also looks into the current challenges on how do we deal with topics related to governance, civil society, and democracy in general. It is interesting you started your presentation by emphasizing such a challenge that we are facing. Um, yeah, from one perspective is because it's due to the situation of the COVID-19 pandemic, but still how the global society, particularly under a structure of the modern states, responded quite in various ways, and in some ways exposes the elements of orders and disorders in society and shows how things are actually a lot more dynamic on how each society would respond to the situation. You also pointed out some elements about even going earlier to this century, the discussion about the Arab Spring and some other challenges which perhaps Arab countries, but I think it is also relevant to other parts of the world on the challenges towards democratization, which includes economic recessions, especially on how it is actually affecting the new generations, the younger generations in general, war between countries and the influences of superpowers, issues of extremism, the rise of the far right globally as something more like a global phenomena, which in a simple way, it portrays some element of the move towards democracy is getting a bit more bleak. How to have an imagination of democracy of the future if you're talking about 21st century as a century which should be moving more towards democratization. All these phenomena, which I've mentioned earlier, including what we are discussing now, COVID-19, and response of various governments and states are actually moving towards something which can be seen as a bit going back, not moving towards democratization, but going more towards authoritarianism. But it is, I think you've mentioned quite several important points about how do we imagine not just about politics, but society in general in moving forward, of how do we see elements of nodal governance, urban activism, and as a path towards democratization. Or in other words, I would take it, our imagination of democracy perhaps should in some way also move forward or beyond an expectation that democracy comes from governments, that it requires further agency and working together between members of the community. In fact, at this point, I think it's interesting, how does it relate to the situation of COVID-19? A lot of governments in the world have been criticized due to their poor responses to the situation of COVID-19, and a lot of positive initiative, as you also mentioned, can be seen from the ground, from the people working together, either the health workers, the frontliners who are not only coming from state agencies, but also coming from the community to battle the situation. So based on that brief remark, that elements of optimism is something which I think a lot of our attendees do appreciate as well. I'll just look into some of the questions which have been addressed here on the topic discussion. I will start with the question by Adriana Abu. So her question here is, I'll just read it out. Your analysis that authoritarianism is closely tied to economic expansion and opportunity is on point, Dr. Heba. What we have seen with this pandemic is a lopsided chasm or gap between the rich and the super rich and the rest of humanity should be addressed in the new normal. How best can we ensure this moving forward? I think this question also repeats some of the concerns about the close relation between governance and also the economy, and how would that we could see things to move forward under the setting of the new normal. Perhaps you have some comments, Dr. Heba?
And my comment here is actually that the rich do not learn the lessons because COVID-19 basically highlighted that there is no way to escape. If there is a pandemic, everyone is going to be affected by it, even the rich. So there is a need for restoration of an agenda of social justice. And but I don't think that the ideologies at hand at the moment of resistance are enough, because there are new factors that are coming also of that urban segregation in a way, the new gated communities, etc. So there is always that sense of privilege, the sense of that our spaces are more secure, which is a myth basically, which is an illusion, because at the end of the day, societies do not function this way. So how, if the societies are going to be segregated and separated, whether in terms of new cities that will have their own dynamics with a very, very high price to buy a slot there, which is by nature economically excluding other people. And even when people say that these are open cities, you can go if you want, you can go and visit. I cannot go because I can't afford the transportation. I cannot visit because I can't, are actually interested. Some of the studies are saying that these relations are taking us back to the Middle Ages. There is a very interesting a study or sort of paper, introduction basically of a book by Nizar Sayyad that is called titled Medieval Citizenship. It's like he is talking from an urbanist perspective about the return to the camp, the castle, and the settlements. So are we going back to this, to the very medieval sort of modernity? So our modernity is not progress to the future. It's bearing and sometimes even returning to some forms of division of space that we used to see in the Middle Ages. So it has also a medieval face, even if it's a postmodern condition. So it's very interesting to bring together all these, because
Yeah, so I think I got some of your responses on chat. Yeah, as Dr. Heba was explaining some of her points, so we lost her. I hope Dr. Heba will come back to us shortly. Yeah, so while waiting for Dr. Heba, I'm just thinking hopefully that she'll be able to join in back. Perhaps there are some of our attendees or participants who would like to contribute to the discussions, either based on your comments. I know that there are several questions here that I will continue to ask when Dr. Heba comes back into the scene. Perhaps is there any participants you have would like to give some comments or ideas? You can just simply raise your hands on Zoom, and we can perhaps hear from you. Some of your comments maybe from Dr. Heba's presentation.
Hi, I'm sorry, I had a
Okay. Nice to hear back from you. Okay, Dr. Heba, I'm not sure at what point that we missed, but yeah, perhaps you can still just repeat some of your main key points before we move to the next question.
Okay, so what I was saying is that basically there are lessons to be learned from COVID-19, but there are also structural, in terms of space, what I call cementing of new relations, because you're not talking about ideologies, you're not talking about policies that can change, but you're talking about urban planning, and you're talking about cementing of distance between basically privileged and ruling elites and the others. And the situation will highlight new dynamics of power as well. So I think urban politics is very important to look into in the coming years, and see how we can make comparisons between different regions, the urban development that took place, but also go to the overarching high finance scene and see how global capitalism functions in terms of housing, in terms of investment, in terms of urban development, and how this also will definitely affect the space, what we call the public space, because the space will be fragmented. And what impact would that have on what we call civil society today? It will be different societies and different public spheres in a way, with different publics. How can you build a democratic system on that? Not only difference, but separation and segregation. Even within the same city, you will have areas that you cannot basically access. So how that would have an impact on our wider understanding of social justice, but also on activism. What type of agenda for activists in the coming years should take place? I see behind you, Ihsan, this yellow book. I think it's Futures. The work that is that is coordinated
Yeah.
by Ziauddin
Yeah.
Sardar. So I instead of
That's one from the Muslim
yeah,
Institute book.
I actually
It's fascinating how you can see it's quite far from here.
because I have the work of Ziauddin Sardar. I follow him. He's a good friend. So I actually, instead of new normal, I actually prefer post normal, because new normal establishes something that you cannot challenge. If you say we are going into the new normal, okay, what can I do? I would be belonging to the past if I say I disagree or I reject this new normal. But if you say the post normal, it enhances your ability to actually reflect critically, because it's like this post normal is unpredicted. It's very complex. There is a high degree of complexity and unpredictability, but also it stimulates the ability of those who are interested to foresee the future to basically try to understand the complexity of it, and then to anticipate with as much as they can, because it's post normal. We also have very few tools, but if you cross the fields of study, then you would have more tools to understand what is going on. So I would encourage people to read the work of Ziauddin Sardar on the post-normal times, because I think it's more informative than the ongoing new normal discourse that is basically used by many governments to foster their new procedures and their new regulations, and make you incapable of challenging them, because this is the new normal.
Thank you for your suggestion on that point. Perhaps we'll have Dr. Zia Sarra next in our maybe one of our later webinar sessions, hopefully. But okay, before going there, I will going to go back to some of our questions. This question is by Huda Ramli. So Huda is asking about, what do you think of the rise of citizens policing fellow citizens during pandemic? I think this is very much a very important question when we are talking about our situation now over the past several years, or perhaps this one decade that we can talk about, is also a phase, a time of advancing technology and governance, while at the same time in the situation of pandemic now that is happening. And the issue of citizens surveillance is definitely not a new issue that's already being raised before, but the advancing technological force being utilized by governments during a time of pandemic. And just if to add one point, if I think it is an issue which resonates a lot, especially among those, if I would say, we have in Muslim countries, the elements of skepticism towards authoritarian government is in some ways not nothing new. Looking into this situation all, and not, which where we are now, how much is the issue of surveillance is a major concern on this?
Definitely it is. I was just giving an example in a lecture yesterday that surveillance will become, though it is very handy at hand for citizens, with the small cameras that you can put in front of your door, with the ability to track someone's sort of mobility in a way. But at the same time, the government is not absent when it comes to surveillance, because it always wants to have the upper hand So, for example, drones are, I mean, drone cameras. What I mean by drones is drone cameras are forbidden in Egypt. They are not. You don't have the right to own a drone camera because there is a high security concern regarding that. So, so this is when it comes to the technology of surveying. Alhamdulillah. But when it comes to citizens surveying each other, actually, it can be good when you are talking about neighborhoods. So it depends also on the social formations that you are dealing with. If you're talking about people trying to secure their own neighborhoods during times where police is busy doing other things, you know, providing services to people who are in need, or transporting, moving people from one place to the other during a time of pandemic, you know, having extra work on the street to control and maintain a curfew or a lockdown, so that people protect their own neighborhoods, I don't see a problem. But policing is a different thing, you know, because who is responsible for policing in the modern state, regardless of what how we can analyze it, agree or disagree, be critical or not. But this is the mission of the state. I mean, providing security and preventing us from killing each other, like Hobbes said, you know, the war of all against all is the role of the state. So if the state is number one, delegating it to some citizens or allowing citizens to police, not to protect neighborhoods, I'm talking about policing, or if it is basically using surveillance against our own privacy, against our own rights to our own spaces, etc., then policing is an issue. And I will repeat again that there is no phenomenon that we can understand separated or disconnected from the rest of the world. I mean, this is always my concern about what we call area studies. You know, it's as if the Arabs are different from the Malays. You know, of course, culture can differ, but at the end of the day, with the dynamics of life and power, etc., sociology and political perspectives, there are so many commonalities. I mean, we share a lot. We are human beings. Yeah. If you follow what has been going on in Black Lives Matter in the States, it's very interesting because it raised again the question of policing broadly. You know, it's like, what is the police doing? And the police as a structure has been actually globalized as well. I mean, even in the body language, in the attire, in the uniform. I mean, you can see similarities between the uniform of the police in the Middle East and the uniform of the police in the States. You know, it's like, and the more and more accumulation and rise of armament. You know, the police is not anymore. I lived in London for some time, so the police used to go without guns. They just have the stick. You know, because the public sphere is considered to be civil, so there is no need. They can call upon extra, you know, forces if there is a need for that. Of course, after the war on terrorism, this is another story. It can take a full lecture or sometimes even a full course. You know, what happened after 9/11 with policing, what happened after 9/11 with the armament of police on the streets to protect people from terrorists, which is a good excuse because there are terrorists definitely in civil spaces that attack civilians and go into pubs and into parks and kill people. You know. But at the same time, how does that affect us? And the following, what is extremely interested in terms of understanding policing and its dynamics in a country that is open to us to look into that. I mean, the good thing about the United States, with all its different faces of the society and politics in it, is that it's more open to investigate and to examine. So the call of people of limiting the budgets of police, because we pay you money and you kill us, you know, no thank you. We will limit the budget. We will twist your arm. You know, we are the citizens. But on the other hand, also the very interesting counter movement by the police. There were I think, if I'm not mistaken, in Buffalo, New York, when the police pushed an old man and he fell on his back, and there was an investigation. Two cops were referred to sort of investigation, etc. I think 57, if I'm not mistaken, 57, 59, something like that, police officers decided we will not go to the street. We will stay in the police stations, we will do our work, but we will not go for sort of policing on the street, because we are not given the authority, the full authority. I mean, what do you mean, police without exercising violence? Excuse me, no, we can't do that. We have to have an upper hand on the street, etc. So we are not going. So they sort of like refused this attitude by the police authorities to control them as police officers. And it's interesting because you know that the United States, in the different states, they have different regulations. They were called upon by another state, I mean, a police authority in another state in the United States, made like an announcement saying, hey, 57, meaning those 57 or 59 people, we have offers for you. You can come join. We have hard backs, and we are not softy, something like that. And our regulations will not hold you accountable if you exercise your duties, basically. So this is how it's linked. It's like I cannot be a police officer without exercising violence, and this is not arguable. It's like, of course, you cannot be a police officer without having an authority, because this is what you are hired for. But to which level? To which level can you actually kill me? And nobody, I mean, the man was killed on the street, on the screen, and I was actually wondering, why didn't the person who was filming or recording the scene of Floyd stop the police officer from killing them? And the man was dying in front of everyone, and people were just shouting, and then a man died because of the uniform, because of this symbolism of the state, because no one dares to approach a police officer and take his hand or his knees off a person who is dying, because he is doing his job. And I think that what happened in the United States is actually raising a lot of questions about policing and about the future of policing and the future of communities as well. So I will twist your question. I will put it on its head, put it upside down, to alert you to the notion of policing itself and how it was related basically to, interestingly, civility. That to have a civil space, you have to have an authority that is responsible for security to allow people to be in the public sphere citizens. With different levels, with different complexities of the body of policing, but with hybrid security, we see police on the street after the war on terror that looks more like combats. It's like the way they are armed, the way they stand, cover their face. It's like, and how does this affect our sense of security? I don't feel safe when I see that. Actually, I feel a bit disturbed. It's like, can't there be policies of securitization that keep our public sphere safe? To which extent are we going to witness more and more militarization of the public sphere under the claim of fighting terrorism? And why is this fight against terrorism never ending? And these are legitimate questions to ask. But of course, because it creates a domain of fear, if you raise such questions, number one, you can get arrested easily, and number two, accused of being supportive of terrorist movements, and number three, you would be considered as a traitor by fellow citizens who are buying into this culture of fear and over terrification, if there is something like that, terrorizing people to the extent that they would say, just do anything, just protect us, without exercising any public control or any public sort of public debate about how would we like to see our police functioning. And you are told you don't know enough, you should shut up. These issues of security are very sensitive because they are claimed to be related to the issues of sovereignty, and hence there is so little that the government knows better and they are protecting you, and you want ISIS to come into your streets and your neighborhoods. It's like everywhere you hear that. And the case of Black Lives Matter, actually, this is a very good question, and it's very important, but it takes so much time to respond to it. There are so many ideas related to policing in our days.
Thank you, Dr. Heba. There's another question. I think it's still quite related to the topic about um, governance, authoritarianism, and also policing. So this question is by Izzat Razi. Since the topic of authoritarianism and Dr. Heba mentioned on the policing as an institution, could you maybe discuss from the ground or from the people's perspective? So what he is referring here is perhaps there is an option of an institution of protest or something related to the protest by itself has its own institution as a check or a balance to the authoritarian force of governance. Or maybe some response from you.
I think we have the watch groups, you know, that people basically see and raise voices. But you have to have also dynamics to affect the, I mean, it would be a very vibrant public sphere, but law at the end of the day will be drafted and will be issued by those who are in seats of power. So it's not enough actually to have, and some topics need to be flowing, basically. It's very hard to institutionalize uh, resistance. Resistance depends on the notion of spontaneity, on the notion of, I mean, I'm not talking about organized revolution, I'm talking about resistance and, you know, the attempt to control and to voice the concerns and the demands of people. There is a high degree in social movements, as I know. I mean, the Arab Spring basically was a reflection of that. It was not planned, it was not organized, it was unaccepted and so I'm not sure about that every action we need to do should be structured in a way. Of course, there are actions that need to be structured so that a structure basically changes the over-dominant and overarching structure. But when it comes to resistance, you can have citizens networks. You can use social media, which is now under a lot of control and increasing concern by politicians and by the states everywhere. But I'm not very supportive of this notion of organizations of control of policing, because you will not be even given a legal cover for that. You will not be given a permission for that. What you can say, what you can do is basically use culture and use whatever available means of social dynamics to basically at least enlighten people. People don't see it in the first place. I mean, 90% of the people in our region are okay with the exercise of people of the state of its own powers and basically salute it and hail it, etc. Even if it basically affects their basic right to social justice and freedom. So it's not easy. I mean, we're not talking about people against the governments. We're not talking about regimes and the revolutionary forces. We're talking about a division that is not only created by regimes to split, divide and rule policies, to split the people and to split the front of those who are in opposition, but we are also talking about dynamics of power within societies themselves, with people who are less sensitive, let me be polite, less sensitive to change and less sensitive to their own rights as human beings. Yani I had a lot of work in society, in development, etc., not only in academia, and I saw how actually for a long time with the educational system, with the policing system, with the political propaganda, people sometimes do not feel the worth of their humanity, and unfortunately, this can be quoted by religious discourse as well. You know, unfortunately, as much as religion can be a very revolutionary force, it can also be a force to make people accept injustices and use fate to when I don't find a bed for my mother in a hospital or services that keep her alive because of the shortages of financing of the of the medical and health sector in a country, it has nothing to do with fate and with accepting that death is a fate and we have to accept the death of this person. No, actually, there is a policy issue and someone has to be held responsible and accountable. So this sort of overcoating with religious discourse is also very seriously damaging in our societies, but it's acceptable to people. Yeah, and what can you do? So we try to enlighten, we try to work as much as we can to make people see, and then what they would do after that, we hope that it would be as pacifist as possible, but also as effective as possible. And how can we do that? You have to have different dynamics, because if you establish an organization or institution, it is usually depending on the long durée till it rises to its potential, and then there are issues of power inside it. So I'm not saying that anarchism is the solution, you know, but sometimes spontaneity also matters, and networking and nodal resistance vis-a-vis nodal governance or nodal securitization.
On your point earlier of some relation between religion and something which could also perhaps relate to authoritarian practices, I want to post a question which comes from Facebook. So I'm not sure who's the person is, but I hope the person is listening on Facebook now. The question goes, is there an inherent predisposition in Arab states towards philosophies of authoritarianism and or the rule of the strong man that existed pre-COVID-19, but which benefits from emergency-type rule as a result of the response of the pandemic? Or I would understand the question, could there be any relations to philosophies which comes from the Arab states or perhaps from religion by itself, which actually relates to authoritarian practices, especially at the time of COVID-19 now?
I don't think that there is an Arab exceptionalism. You know, that we are, by nature of our culture, we are more authoritarian than anyone else in the world. Yeah, I think it's the history of the state formation and the tools it has used, and also let me borrow the leftist discourse, you know, also hegemony, the dynamics of empire on the global level. So the nature of the nation state itself and its formation in the third world generally, it's not only us, it's Africa, it's Latin America, Southeast Asia in some situations. So I don't believe that there is something inherently Arab in our political situation, because we also are those who managed to do the Arab Spring, wave 1 and wave 2. So wave 1, 2010-11, and wave 2, 2019. So no, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Of course, we have to look into the culture. I mean, but in every culture, you will find patriarchy. I mean, if you're talking about authoritarianism, you can talk about any phenomena. You can talk about abuse of the poor. You can talk about the proletariat. You can talk about the women's injustice against women. It's again, it's a human phenomena, but history matters. You have to understand the history of the Arab world to understand why the state is so authoritarian, and also the global phenomena. I don't think that that the counter revolutions could have succeeded without the support of the superpowers on the global scene. I mean, it's just, you know, it was a good thing for them, because these counter revolution regimes basically facilitate more. It does not mean, by the way, that those who came into power after the revolution would not have done the same. This is a different question. Would they have been submissive also to the dynamics of global politics, or more revolutionary? And were they ready to pay the price of challenging the global system? Part of the counter-revolution is the support of the global system. So it's complicated.
Yep. Okay, there's another question. This question relates to, I think, more on intervention between one country to another country. So still, the question is from Facebook. I'm not too sure who's the person who's asking. You have stated that the pandemic has not stopped conflict and wars from taking place. Do you think that one country will take advantage of another country's inability to respond to COVID-19 is something which relates to a pursuit of territorial expansion? perhaps this relates to the idea of sovereignty of nation states between different countries in the situation of pandemic. Perhaps you have some response on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, why not? States are not decent. They don't say, oh, our enemy is now in a very bad situation. It's not it's not decent to attack. Definitely, it's an opportunity for any state if there is a weakness in the other area. So, but of course, it has its own calculations as well, and especially with what we mentioned regarding complexity. It's not easy to pull a string without many things related to different actors taking place. I don't think that COVID-19 had a real impact on that. I mean, on the contrary, it's amazing how, despite COVID-19, some conflicts have been going on very strongly without even taking a break. And this notion in Islam of al-ashhur al-hurum, that we have 4 months every year where people should not be fighting, we have peace, etc. It's not happening in our world today, unfortunately. So of course, opportunities are opportunities. Political opportunities are political opportunities.
I think I will take the opportunity to ask the last question. One of during your talk earlier, which I think attract my interest most, is your explanation about urban politics, and in fact you mentioned about one of your main interests of study now covers more urban sociology and how does it relates to politics. This question in fact relates to your earlier starting point of your talk earlier about how do we understand the world as being comprising mainly of modern nation states, while at the same time the increasing importance of urbanity, or how do we describe modern society now, tends to be something of a phenomena which is increasing globally. I think I was reading one article earlier this week, which actually describes Malaysian society is already moving towards an 80% urban population, meaning that compared to the main social discussion and social discourse in Malaysia, it usually tends to be directed towards a more ethnic or a nation discourse and discussion. The relevance of discussions about society and policy now have highly strongly moved towards the urban discourse. So on that point, do you foresee that the path of further discussions about either democracy, about governance, and in fact the path towards democratization itself, in some way should or would move beyond the discussion about modern nation states, as meaning that states representing different countries which has its own law and sovereignty, into a reality which more explains the situation of urbanity as the centrality of the discourse?
Definitely, and this is what is meant by nodal governance as well. I mean, it is part of it. How can the nodes be redistributed according to the urban map, but also to the non-urban map, like in rural areas, how to initiate the local initiatives and how to manage the local politics or the area politics, small communities politics, etc. But this also raises another question, which is that in anthropology they say, not all of them, of course, some scholars say that actually there is a very interesting book that I teach titled The Tribal Imagination, and it claims that human beings don't think individually. This is the myth of individualism. People think in terms of the collective. I mean, when you take a decision, you always have even at the back of your mind, the calculation regarding, am I going to leave my mother? Who's going to stay with her? If I don't come back, what happens with my, house? If I do this, if I do that, there are always calculations in your mind. And also there has been for many years, literature on new tribes, neo-tribalism and neo-nomadism. So on one hand, you have growing number of people, citizens, 80%, 70% living in urban spaces, but human beings, this is why anthropology and sociology are important. human beings need to belong to a collective entity, need to feel the bond. So if they don't have it, if they don't carry with them the tribal affiliations, which they do, by the way, in many cities, people basically live closer to those who speak the same dialect, come from the same origin, you know. But if they don't find them, because of the alienation that sociologists talked about for decades, they tend to cluster. So they create new tribes. But these new tribes are like the new social movements. They are not like long lasting. People can come in and come out and drop out easily. So there is the continuous formation of new tribes of belonging and clustering and bonds, but then their fragmentation again, and the ability of the human agent to basically shift to other tribes and other bonds, etc. So this is a new form of clustering and bonding that is related to urbanization, but there are also ghettos in the city. And this is what we don't see. This is what is under the surface. These are the rhizomes, how people connect basically in a more irregular way, but that has its own logic and its own rationale. So I don't think that moving to the urban space in itself will make people more individualistic, but we have to be very much observing how people will organize. And this is the same when we are talking about that now there are different dynamics of policing in the city. In the case of Cairo, for example, after 9 years of 2011, after 9 years of the Arab Spring in Egypt. But this means that also people will start dealing with this policing and with this urban militarism in a way that is much more different. And it's important to try to spot how people will react, because there is no power without a reaction on the ground. There is no exercise of sovereignty without an attempt by the people to respond in different ways. So it's like there is always that need to explore the post-normal, as we said. New tribalism and neo-nomadism, especially also with globalization, in case of your age and generation, many of you also will start living in different cities in different times, whether inside the same country, you study in a city, you get a job offer in another city, etc. So the agency of people can be interrupted, because you move, the mobility itself in space. But at the same time, the bonds and how people sustain these bonds and how these bonds can have political potential as well is a huge issue to explore, and there needs a lot of group work by social scientists, because what can be spotted by an urban sociologist needs to be interpreted and decoded by and have a futuristic perspective and scenarios drawn by political scientists or an economist, for example. That's why I always urge my students to go and study other fields of study in social sciences. I highly recommend taking a course in political economy, usually for political scientists and even sociologists. And also now, recently, have a look at the security studies, because the thread, or basically the dome over all of that, is basically security. And we, for a long time, we did not look into security studies. I mean, they were like a realm that only those interested maybe in international relations or security studies per se are interested in. But I think all social scientists should look into security studies, because there is so much going on that has its shadow on everything that is going in society, not only in terms of the public sphere, but even in private relations. And this is why I was very interested to sort of coordinate a project to translate the books of Zygmunt Bauman on liquidity into Arabic. I supervised it, and professor colleague translated most of these books: Liquid Modernity, Liquid Love, Liquid Surveillance, Liquid Time, Liquid Fear. So this understanding of liquidity and what is going on is very important. But liquidity does not mean that we don't have the solid as well as structures, locally and internationally, whether even cultural structures, social structures, political structures, but also global structures. And it's always important to zoom in to the very anthropological and then to zoom out to the very global and in between the different levels to grasp and understand, not only for scholars, by the way, but for human beings to understand why you have failed in your romantic life, why we are witnessing such high rates of divorce in the first year of marriage, why people act in such a violent way vocally on the street and in social media. There are so many things that you have to understand, and usually what is so important about the thesis of Bauman regarding liquidity, and also Wright Mills since the 50s when he talked about the sociological imagination, is that we always see our own dilemmas and our own catastrophes and problems as our own. There must be something wrong with me or something wrong with my fate, and then people lose faith. It's like, why God is accepting all these injustices, etc. you know but actually there are structures that you have to act against if you want to change your life, and you have to understand the dynamics of these political structures and their influence on your social life. And that's why people who want social justice say you cannot escape on your own. You have to act in collective agency, because you will not be safe if there is injustice. If there are injustices everywhere, you cannot close your door and feel safe if injustice and brutality is actually spreading. So you have to have a say. You have to have an action to sort of resist in a way, with different levels of and different levels and on different levels and with different tools.
Thank you very much, Dr. Heba. On that final note, I also refer to some of the works by Bauman as well. And in fact, there was a center, Bauman Center, when I studied in Leeds last year, which, yeah, there are a lot of interesting discussions related to Bauman sociology. Anyway, on that point, as usual, I would like to invite all our attendees to give a brief round of applause on your own, at your own time, right? To such an interesting discussion and talk by Dr. Heba today. I always think that one way to know whether we had a good discussion is perhaps we start with one question, but at the end of the session we realize that we end up with like an infinite number of questions from the discussion that we had today. So once again, I would like to thank you, Dr. Heba, again. I would like to thank all our attendees of our IRF webinar session this time.
Thank you for the hospitality, and I want to thank everyone for participation and for your time.
Yes, look forward to meet Dr. Heba again, perhaps on her next visit to Malaysia, hopefully not too long from now. By the way, just before I end the session, I would also like to inform that even though it's yet to be finalized, most likely we are going to have another webinar session on the July 18 on the topic of politics and policy, COVID-19, how does it relate to the topic of press freedom in Malaysia. That would be July 18, more or less at the same time, around 3 o'clock. Until then, I would like to wish everyone a very good time. Dr. Heba, again, thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And stay safe. Have a good time.